Taught myself BASIC. In fact, the best computer program I ever wrote went something like, what's your name, Mr. Dixon? You're a jerk, Mr. Dixon. What's your name? Trent. You rule, Trent.
I heard this story and I said to Bill, well, my first investment went 22x and I've made these other 6 investments. What should I do? And he goes, get out now. I didn't listen.
Got to $1 million in revenue and no profit, and we couldn't quite figure out what was going on there. So we chose to exercise the right to, what were we? 23, going into large organisations, telling them to spend a lot of money for us to tell them that websites were shit. So it was a very unique selling proposition.
I was right in the middle. I call myself the meat in the shit sandwich. I was in between the board, the investors, the customers, the partners, the staff, and co-founders. And I was stuck in the middle there, and I was fucking hating life.
And so the lesson I learned, which I kind of knew, but still, was...
Hi, I'm Josh. Welcome to the show, Two Commas. We've got Trent Mankelow on the show today. Rich and varied conversation. He's obviously a successful founder. He's been through a number of exit journeys himself as a founder and as an advisor and an investor. He's made some mistakes and he's quite generous sharing about those mistakes. And he also took a job along the way too to head up product at TradeMe, one of New Zealand's most successful and largest tech businesses. We share some philosophies, we talk about investing, we talk about mistakes, and we talk a lot about the ego, which makes it a really rich and varied conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Trent, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you here. Why is being a director a bit boring?
Well, of course, people have different views on this. In my view, the really interesting stuff is more the doing. So in the governance roles that I've been involved with, I guess you're pretty arm's length from the actual doing stuff. And particularly, again, depends on the board and the company, it can get a little bit mired in risk. And so you're always thinking about all the things that could go wrong, which is the role of a board. That's what they're there for. And yeah, I just think that it's more fun to be in the arena as opposed to in those governance roles sometimes.
Yeah, I hear you. And yet, at this stage in your career, that's something that you've chosen to pursue and embrace. So how do you deal with that kind of paradox?
Well, one thing I do is, and it's a bit naughty when you look at the way you're supposed to do things, of course, is that separation of governance and management and operations. That's always talked about as being an important kind of division of responsibilities. So I don't necessarily throw that out the window, but what I do is make sure that I get in the weeds enough to know what I'm talking about. And by that, I mean... I spend the time to get to know the people, especially the leadership team beyond the CEO and the business. So that means, depending on the business, getting involved in the events that they run or the day-to-day type stuff. And that's not to meddle, not to kind of, be too much in the weeds, but more to get a depth of understanding. So the issues that are discussed around the board table, I have a coherent, intelligent, instinctual view of that goes a bit further than kind of just reading papers. Yeah,
and it gives you some context as well, right? Yep. Because rather than just kind of black and white, two-dimensional, you can relate it back to the person, exactly. Maybe the challenges that they're experiencing, the colour.
Yeah, especially on the people front. So, to take, what I tend to do is to take each of them out individually, the leadership team, and chat, hear a bit about, their story and why they're there and also what are the things that we need to be thinking about as a board and kind of do it in an informal setting. Especially there's something magical, you'll know this, about breaking bread together, sharing a meal. So, that kind of, gives so much more colour than... reading a paper.
Yeah, of course. So you came to directorship from a successful career as an entrepreneur, as a founder. So give us a bit of that backstory, please, Trent.
Sure thing. So started out as a farm boy and like you. And what that meant was that because we lived out in the country, we would be at primary school the last ones to be picked up by the buses. They'd go around the intermediates and the colleges and they'd finally get to us. And so we'd have quite a long gap between ending school and being picked up by the bus. And so to fill that gap, I would play around on the one computer that there was at the primary school, a BBC Micro. Taught myself BASIC. In fact, the best computer program I ever wrote went something like, what's your name, Mr. Dixon? You're a jerk, Mr. Dixon. What's your name? Trent. you rule, Trent. What's your name? Just went in infinitely.
Did you commercialise that?
Look, I should have. Yeah. That was the peak of my programming powers. So decided pretty early on, primary school, that I wanted to be a software engineer. Didn't know that's what it was called at the time. Went to Wellington to join a global IT services company called Unisys. Figured out very quickly that wasn't for me. Very much felt like a number. But at the time, they hired 15 graduates. I think it was 15 in Wellington. All of us pretty much from out of town. So it was this instant group of mates because pretty much, we didn't know anyone else. We all kind of started flatting together and hanging out together, socialising together. And one of the people in that group was a guy called Sam, and very quickly we hit it off. We ended up, flatting together. And in that particular flat, it was a very entrepreneurial flat. We were all reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, talking about these concepts. That was the hit thing at the time. So I guess at some point Sam and I said maybe we should start a business together. And that business ended up being something called optimal usability. So in my computer science degree, I wasn't the best coder. I worked hard. I got the grades, but there were people around me who were a level above. And except when I got to my final year, where we studied something called human-computer interaction, and that was just a topic that I found so interesting that I just read the book cover to cover. It talked about the psychology of how people interact with technology. So, why we see colour better out of the middle of our eyes and movement better out of the sides, and kind of applying that to how you might design technology. And Sam's background was more in kind of industrial design. So from the very start, you don't design the height of an average, you don't design a chair without knowing the height of an average person. So he was very much embedded in that. Of course, you would talk to users and try and understand their needs before you design something. And yet at Unisys, what we were doing was developing pretty cutting-edge telephony applications for Latin American markets. They were getting translated into Spanish. And there wasn't a single cent or thought spent on who the end users of these products might be. Wow. So him and I were lamenting this fact that this global IT company didn't know what they were doing in terms of creating a usable product. And that's why we decided to create a services business really built around observational research, watching people interact with technology, finding all the confusing, annoying and frustrating things that trip them up. And then, I guess writing reports and kind of doing audits for big companies. But certainly in year one, we thought we're probably going to be bankrupt in a year. And I think maybe we made $37,000 in year one, which, you take away expenses and divide by 2 is about $1.50 each. But I think the next year was $300,000 and sort of things started to snowball from there as we built our reputation and what was a very nascent kind of area. Not a lot of people were thinking about usability testing and all the other associated research methods that went with it.
Yeah, that was the word that popped into my mind because you had the experience of being at Unisys as a developer and the programs, the applications that were being delivered. You're like, who's considering what the interaction is going to be like? And so you saw an opportunity based upon an observed problem, but not seeing other people that were solving that problem in the same way. And so it's interesting because the way that we tend to consider startups is that they are product oriented, but you did a services startup.
To begin with, that's right.
Yeah. So how did you go about taking that out to the world and convincing organisations who were your early customers, for example, and how did you convince them that this was a thing that they needed to pay attention to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We were what were we, 23? Going into large organisations, telling them to spend a lot of money for us to tell them that their websites were shit. So it was a very unique selling proposition. So purely by intuition, what we did was to talk with anyone who would have us. So whether or not that's very early meetings with organisations that were, no way were they ready to, were we ready to be hired by them. But those early conversations are really insightful. I remember one here in Auckland with Air New Zealand who said, we'll never hire you, but here are some things to think about. Air New Zealand became a very big client of ours in later years. But the other thing we do is go to the New Zealand Computer Society talks, the marketing talks, and we had something interesting to say. So we were talking about, again, these kind of techniques and these kind of, human behaviours, I guess. And so that was one thing that we did pretty well, was to get our name out there pretty early. A lot of heavy lifting, a lot of, conversations and a lot of talks to sometimes very small crowds. And then the other thing that we did, I was doing some development work for the Canterbury Clothing Company. And we said, okay, well, we'll do this usability review for you. It costs $8,000, but we're going to charge you $2,000. We made sure it was on the invoice, $8,000 minus $6,000 discount, $2,000. And the deal is that's going to be our calling card. We're not going to have a pamphlet. We're not going to have a business card. We're going to use this big fat report, and we're going to, when we sit down and talk to ACC and Victoria University, both early clients, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to say, look, this is what we did for Canterbury Clothing Company. We can do something similar for you. So that was another thing that we did, I guess, is to use those early reports as kind of the calling card, the sales pitch.
It's a beautiful thing. Canterbury was and is a very visible and obvious brand to New Zealand. I think it's owned by overseas interests these days, unfortunately. It is, but that's a very clever thing to do tactically, because you often get asked to discount if you're in a new space or offering a completely new service, or if you're just a new venture. And so what you did is you attached a condition to that to say, can we utilise this as being a case study, essentially, and we can take it out to the world. And so what was the consequence of you taking that approach? Oh, look,
I think that it sold itself. Like, we were able to demonstrate this is the kind of thing that you can expect from us, these big, rich reports that go into a lot of detail about, the different usability issues. So at the beginning, we were doing these usability audits more than kind of the observational research. But then what happened pretty quickly was ACC got in touch. We bid for some work and we won that work. And I think that once you have brands like that, everyone else assumes that they've done the due diligence. If ACC is working with you, they must have really checked you out. You must know what you're talking about. But the other thing which was true was that it was pretty blue ocean. So the only other people doing this kind of work in New Zealand were a small number of university usability labs. And of course, if you want your PhD students kind of poring over your website, that's one thing. But what they wanted was, and we could demonstrate it because we had that report, a very pragmatic and practical kind of approach. So yeah, it's just sort of all started from there. And because we were spending all of this time kind of going to every talk that we could, every conference, every little, association of New Zealand librarians or whatever it was, our name started to become synonymous with this kind of, burgeoning field, this new idea of actually, surprise, if you want to see if something's easy to use, sit down with people, get them to use it. Like, it doesn't seem like a breakthrough in that sense, but it was pretty new here in New Zealand at the time. Yeah.
Now it seems very obvious looking back. And so one of the risks with a very new venture is that you can spend a lot of time educating people and not getting paid for that education. And it sounds like perhaps there was a little bit of that during the first 12 months or so, but given you're a couple of 23-year-old, essentially kids, that didn't really matter. Did you doubt that you were going to make it in those early days?
Did we? Yeah. I mean, I remember the fear, the absolute fear we felt in hiring our first person, because we were like, well, Sam and I can live on 2-minute noodles, and kind of, at the time, I think maybe Sam was newly married. I didn't have a partner. We both didn't have mortgages. It was, we're pretty, I have a tremendous respect for people who come to entrepreneurship later in their life because they've got so much more at risk. But I do remember hiring Nikki and just thinking, we can't stuff this up now. This is someone who is relying on us to kind of bring in the work. And so I do remember thinking it wasn't at all a 100% done deal. I think probably by year 2, though, we were seeing enough momentum and green shoots to go, no, this could be a proper thing. And by then we were, like I say, our first 3 clients are name brands, pretty much here in New Zealand, and that carried on.
Yeah.
So in the early days, you never know if it's going to succeed. And but it was. Yeah, I think that kind of melted away fairly quickly.
1,000% growth from year 1 to year 2. That's, Fast 50-esque kind of numbers if you maintained it. What was the next couple of years like beyond that? Did you maintain that trajectory?
I think, but maybe not 1,000%. That'd be amazing. In fact, we I guess we're part of the business community in Wellington. We, in fact, were the very first part of the first cohort that went through Creative HQ, business incubator down there. And so the Deloitte Fast 50 was something we very much looked up to. And so we were stoked to make it in, actually, a couple of times there. The growth leveled off. I think maybe it's 25% year-on-year growth towards the latter years. But yeah, it kept on growing. It kept at a reasonable clip for a while.
Yeah, yeah. And you had a really good presence across New Zealand, but you managed to make it across the Tasman and succeed again with the services business in Australia.
Well, did we succeed?
I don't know.
I'm not sure that we did. So yeah, that part of the story is we had a very well-respected, well-known usability expert, I guess, in Australia approach us. And at that time, we'd spent a lot of time with Australian usability companies like ours. And it was, this is the Kiwi way, isn't it? We just went over and went, what are you guys up to? What are you doing? What are you finding in the market? What's going on? And actually we joined something called a UX Alliance later on, which was amazing because it was pants down stuff. You talked about everything, your revenue and your profit and your employees and all the problems, and that was with a group of companies that were in different geographical areas, so we could be fully transparent without worrying about conflicts of interest and competition, I guess. But anyway, so this woman approached us, and I was going to say that we'd spoken with a number of the Australian firms like us, and it just seemed a bit messy and a bit more, didn't seem like us. It seemed a bit more. But yeah, she approached us and said, I love what you're doing, and I'd like to build a business under the Optimal banner here in Australia. So we agreed to do that and sort of thought, okay, well, this is an opportunity with fairly low risk, working with someone who was well respected to build an Australian kind of presence. We had a few missteps along the way. The first thing that we did was we had 75% ownership of that Australian operation. Pretty quickly, the woman who was our partner over there was pretty decided that she didn't think that was quite right.
Unfair kind of thing?
Unfair. She thought, that she was going to end up doing all the work. She had all the relationships, and I don't even know how we came up with the 75% to begin with, to be honest. It's lost.
Maybe you funded it or something?
No, there was no real, that's the beauty of a services business, apart from, there's not a lot of capital required if you're doing it right. So we went into quite a formal negotiation. We thought it was going to fall over at the first hurdle. And then as it turned out, the main thing she wanted was that control, that kind of 51%. And so in the end, we agreed to that, but we put a sunset clause in the contract, which meant we had the right to buy her out at an agreed multiple or this kind of lower number. Detail doesn't matter. In 5 years, I think it was. And so she ran that business, and it's probably $1 million in revenue, but no profit. We couldn't understand it because as a services business, we were pretty, billable hours and utilization rates and all that sort of stuff. That's the name of the game in any kind of professional services firm. And it got to $1 million in revenue and no profit, and we couldn't quite figure out what was going on there. So we chose to exercise the right to buy that 51% off her. And that happened shortly before the PwC deal, which you've talked with Chris about before. So, but I wouldn't say that we made a success of Australia. There's probably a few threads to pull on there.
And so at what stage, so Optimal Workshop is a application, a software company, product company that you built. Did that come after the Optimal Usability, or was it along the way of that journey?
Yeah, so we from the very start, we had the thought that we would do a product of some kind. That's Sam's background. Really, he's the true genius of this whole operation. He's the creative guy. I'm the doer. But anyway, we always had it in the back of our minds that we would have a product. And then what happened in 2005 was we were hired by BNZ to run something called card sorting, which is a research method for information architecture. Won't go into the detail here, but effectively it's a tool for us research nerds to try and figure out how people think about and classify information structures. Very good for website planning. So we had this, piece of work that we were doing with BNZ, and at the time there were two tools out there that did the job. One you downloaded onto your computer and you ran it, and you could spit out an Excel spreadsheet out of that. Clearly that wasn't going to work. We didn't want 1,000 people downloading this piece of software and then emailing us the results. And then the only online tool that allowed us to do this method spat out the answer, but it didn't give us the the data, and we're researchers, right? We're nerds. We want the data. We want to be able to cut it in different ways. And so we asked a friend of ours to code up this tool, effectively a drag and drop type tool built in Flash back in the day. And we did this information architecture project for BNZ in 2005 and had thousands of their customers go through it. So it probably would have been the largest card sort ever in New Zealand at the time. And then went, this is actually really helpful. So started using it in our own practice, but it wasn't until 2007 that we had a very important offsite where we agreed, actually we're going to spin this out as a separate product development company, separate limited liability company, same shareholders, slightly different shareholding. We can go into reasons why that was a bad idea if you want. But
yes, please.
And Sam, I should say too, was feeling a bit bored at the time. So there's something about a business, you'll know this too, that sometimes you just follow your intuition and just go, we set up our Auckland office because I was bored of Wellington and wanted to change. We did all of these overseas conferences and got a really good name for ourselves across the world because we love to travel. We're like, we can travel in the business. We kind of made these calls sometimes just because of our own life circumstances. And that's sort of what happened with deciding to spin out a separate product development arm. We fumbled that for a while. We weren't sure exactly what it was. Obviously, we had this tool that we'd built a couple of years ago and we're using ourselves. But we experimented with, thinking, is this a sweat equity thing? The kind of modern venture studio type model. Or we actually bought 0 shares at the IPO for $1. Bought 10,000 shares, sold them for $4.50, thinking we were geniuses.
You made a profit.
Made a profit. I had a look earlier today. 145 Australian.
I've got an expression which may or may not serve you now. It's never lament the gains you didn't make. There's so many gains that we didn't make in life.
That is true.
I allow myself one. I read a biography on Elon Musk back in 2015, the Ashley Vance one, called Elon.
Yes.
And then started to go, this guy's fascinating, and consumed all the things that I could. And he is a fascinating guy, probably the most influential person of our generation on the planet. And I didn't buy any Tesla stock. And that was the one, allow myself some, guilt, regret around that. But there's so many other investments I could have made, and like a 450% profit, 4.5 times your money. Let's not worry about that too much. But eventually we came to the idea. I don't know why it took us so long to go. This tool that we built, a couple of years ago that seems really useful to us. Maybe it'll be useful to others. So, so we kind of built that out over the course of quite a few years. I think we ended up siphoning about $600,000 of dividends into that product company. Okay.
Which, that's real money when you've got a mortgage, and it's real money now. It's regardless. It's but we drip fed it over time, and we never maybe deliberately kind of added it up. And I think in hindsight, had we known it's going to be $600,000 and quite a few years before it hit profitability, then I'm not sure that we would have gone down that route. But now we look like geniuses. But so we spun out a separate SaaS business, started turning charging on. Like I said, fumbled a few things to begin with. We had 3 different developers work on it. One tried outsourcing to Pakistan, that didn't work very well. One guy loved Java, the next programmer loved PHP. Made a few mistakes there, and probably. Sam, great guy, very entrepreneurial, is the reason that these companies exist, but not a technical guy. So possibly, it's quite funny when I think about it. Perhaps, I'm the technical guy. Perhaps it should have been me kind of asking, running some of that stuff. But at the time I was having tremendous fun running the consultancy business. And,
right, got it.
And that was very much Sam's baby.
What were the missteps that you made with the shareholding that you alluded to?
So we had... Sam and I started the business, so 50-50 shareholding, and then later on a good friend of ours joined us, so that ended up being a 40-40-20 split. When we started up the product company, that was a third. So myself, Sam, and Salish Manga. And what that meant when you were siphoning dividends across from a 40-40-20 to a third means that, hang on, how are we going to deal with that? And eventually we swapped that debt for equity, and in one of those deals that no one is very pleased by and very happy with the end result, which probably means it was a fair thing that we did, but there was a bit of angst along the way, I guess, because of the unequal shareholding between the two.
Yeah. And in around about 2011, 2012, in the original services business, Optimal Usability, you made the decision to hire Chris Nygren. He's been on the show, but this is the alternate view. So I'm curious as to what gave you the foresight, firstly, to kind of go, because it's not a very common thing for people to do in a services company. They tend to build it around them. They hire an external CEO. And the thing that I see all too regularly is that they hire the CEO, they second guess every move that they make, and then they make their lives difficult and they don't support them publicly, and then it falls down around them and they blame the person they hired rather than realising it was their own shortcomings as the founder, the founding team. So firstly, what made you think that was the right thing and the right time to do it?
So I think all the way along, you get some of these founders who are the business, and they're very much, their identity is caught up in what they've created. I wasn't like that. I sort of always felt myself separate from this thing that I'd built. Partly that was my management and leadership style too. I was kind of like, had these GMs and they'd be off doing stuff, and so it was actually a source of pride for me to not be have to be intimately involved in every single part of that business. And it got to the point where I was starting to feel tired. In fact, we would do these strategic tramps. So all three of us love tramping. And but Sam and Sal at the time had young kids, and so we'd never get a chance to go bush. So we'd kind of invent these excuses to, sorry, have to do this, strategic planning retreat, for the year. We got to the point where we would take dictaphones because we, the first time that we did it, we'd have these really rich, interesting discussions and then forget what we'd talked about. So the second time we did it, we actually bought dictaphones and recorded the decisions. But because you're walking for 6 hours or 8 hours, you end up discussing things in a way that you don't if you're sitting around a boardroom table for a couple of hours. It's, what would we do to disrupt us? How would we take us down? I'll do this and I'll do that. And you just end up with these really great discussions. Anyway, on one of those tramping trips, one of the guys, I forget who, sort of pointed out that I was coming up for my 10-year anniversary in a couple of years. And I went, shit, that's a long time to dedicate to anything, let alone, it doesn't matter that it's the thing that I've, helped create. And so that put a line in the sand for me and went, no, I do want to do other things in my life and career. And so made the decision that I wanted to, hand it over to someone else. Unfortunately, my succession plan was to, hand it over to one of the others. They both ended up going overseas. One was in Cambodia, the other one was in Chicago. And so then it became obvious that I'd need to hire from outside the building. And the intent, which Chris talked about, was that we would hire a GM in Auckland with very much with a clear, plan that would be succession for me. And I think our plan originally was a year or two, as GM of Auckland, prove yourself. He came in. One of the first things we got him to do was to write the strategic plan, which not normal to ask a brand new person who's not the CEO to write the strategy for the business. And he just did such an amazing job of that. And so very quickly got confident that Chris was our guy. He was a little bit risky in the sense that he didn't have domain expertise. But when you look at the, especially in CEO roles, you've got all these overlapping circles of experience that you want. And it's actually pretty rare that you'd find someone who overlaps in every area. They're good at sales and they're good at operations and they're good at the people management, they're good at leadership and he was good at all of it, except that he didn't have a whole depth of experience in the actual usability stuff. But guess what? We had 30 other people who had that. So he ended up being absolutely fabulous. And because I was kind of ready to move on, handing that baton didn't feel in any way weird to me to do that. Felt very confident from very early on.
What did you do to support and ensure that Chris was successful in the job once he was sitting in the seat?
I think it's, one of the things I did fairly quickly was to not be there.
Yeah, okay. So let go. That's like not abdicate, but just kind of get out of the way.
When you're not around, Chris becomes the guy that you talk to. We're always pretty open with the team too. He mentioned that we let them know that we were, considering a sale to PwC a lot earlier than perhaps you otherwise would. So me talking about, Chris and the plan and all that sort of stuff. You've obviously got to be thoughtful in how you do that. You don't want to spook the horses, but... So that was part of it, but I think just me not being in the building. And then the other thing is to remain on the board. So to support him in that sense, to know, what he's going through and make sure I'm, asking the challenging questions but not doing it in a way that's ever undermining his authority in the team or anything like that.
So when did the PwC conversation start to crop up?
That was probably early 2014. Yeah, it all happened relatively quickly from memory. Might have been late 2013.
Yeah. To what extent do you think that having Chris in that seat at that stage and the independence that offered from the founders was a big influence for PwC in wanting to accelerate and buy the business?
Yeah, not sure. Obviously, it's probably a question for them, but for Chris to take over, I think he grew revenue, a good chunk in year one. He grew client NPS, he grew staff satisfaction. What it did for me is meant that there was no earn-out. So it was a very clean deal for me and for the other shareholders, because it's clear that Chris was the guy. He was the one who was to take it forward. So in that sense, it was pretty good for me. But I don't know. It's a good question. I think if I said yes, please, I would like to be a partner as well, then they would have entertained that. But I'm not sure to what extent it's not having me involved was a positive.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the deal happened pretty quickly. Talk us through some of the key milestones, and as much as you're able to share, what the kind of terms and the approach of the deal was.
Yeah, so it was. It all ended up being very clean. As I think Chris kind of went over, it originally kicked off thanks to Deloitte. So Deloitte was looking at creating Deloitte Digital in New Zealand, and somebody had said, hey Trent, you should look at this. We went in to have a chat with them and tried to scare them off and said, look, you'll find it really hard to find staff. It'll take you years. And they said, well, maybe we should just buy you. And we said, well, maybe you should. And of course, we had this strategic plan, which effectively said that exactly that's what we're aiming for. And then, went out and spoke with Ernst & Young and PwC and some others. And yes, because we obviously wanted a competitive dynamic, started to get conversations happening at different rates. And so, we're meeting number 3 with Deloitte, but meeting number 1 at Ernst & Young and stuff like that. And so we went, okay, this is a bit silly. We'll do an IM, give them a very quick turnaround. So I think it was a week. Here's high-level detail on the business. And we expect, non-indicative binding offer, a week from now, which was so much fun because we were, of course, more often doing the opposite. We were responding to RFPs that required ridiculous timelines and all the rest of it. So, and as it turned out, PwC put a really good offer in front of us, and it was funny. I remember going into the meeting. So it was. Chris was doing a bunch of the work, but it was kind of me fronting it, I guess, and alongside Graham Shaw, who was the chair at the time, was a very experienced director and used to pretty big M&A type work. And so I'd skim read my Getting to Yes negotiation book before walking in there, thinking these guys, the M&A, it's the M&A team from PwC. They'll be so slick. Like I'm going to have to be really on it. And then just the offer they put in front of us was very simple and very generous. And I was like, okay,
that much.
Yeah, sounds good. So that worked out really well.
Yeah, wow, okay. So it turned around from, if I just go and recap some of these things, because there's some really kind of critical aspects of it from this seat. You developed some deal tension early on in the deal. You applied some time pressure to kind of get people to move and not waste time, dick around on it for too long. And interestingly, you did it all yourselves, so you had the ability to move quickly and make all those critical decisions, and then probably dealing with the partner level inside PwC, those that are able to write the check, they probably had to write the check themselves. And so the deal itself, you didn't have to do the earn-out. I presume it meant that Chris would come over, the team, etc., would come over. Were there any kind of unusual deal terms that you had to navigate your way through?
Yeah, no is the short answer. So we had, a bit of money was held back and for warranties and that sort of thing, usual stuff. We had as one of the conditions that an X% of billable staff would agree to be hired by PwC. And I remember negotiating what counts as a billable staff and, what percentage. And anyway, we arm wrestled that one probably more than any other clause. And I didn't want to put any pressure on any of our team, because our team was like, join this funky little, consultancy business, and all of a sudden they're going to be swallowed up by this giant behemoth, global, big four. So I didn't tell anybody that there was a clause in the paperwork that said that, and every one of the team signed up for it. So 100% of the staff went across to PwC, and PwC did a bunch of smart things to kind of try and make sure that they stayed. I think everyone pretty much got a pay bump, straight away. There was some people on maternity leave. Well, they got all the PwC kind of, benefits for being on maternity leave, 3 months salary and things like that. Whereas we couldn't afford to do that. So they were pretty shrewd in the way that they tried to, encourage people to come across and stay. But that was the only one that really, was any kind of, it's a pretty simple piece of paper. The sale and purchase agreement was pretty easy.
Yeah, great. Did any others turn up with an offer letter at the same time? Were you comparing between offers?
Ish, because we went into DD after the binding offer. We only actually got a formal offer from PwC.
Right. Yeah, got it. Okay. So for those interested, Chris and I had a detailed conversation about the integration piece and kind of how to make that work, so we're not going to cover that same ground again. But for you were no longer operational. You're 10 years into the business, maybe 11 by the time the deal got done. What did you head off and do? No, actually, different question. What did you make that mean? So something that you dedicated a reasonable chunk of your life and nearly all of your professional life to, and so you've now done the deal. What did that mean for Trent?
Just a kind of a sense of pride and relief, I guess. It's funny. It was sort of I remember signing the paperwork and it just feeling a little bit empty after that. And another thing which happened, which they say is a good thing. So because one of our the shareholders was based in the States, we didn't distribute the money straight away. So for tax reasons, if he was still resident in the States when this kind of windfall came through. So it was something like 9 to 12 months before we actually got the money. And I've read research, you've probably read it as well, that talks about lottery winners and anyone who kind of comes into some sort of windfall in their life, if they can sit with it and do nothing with the dollars, that's actually a really good thing. So that's what happened to us. For better or for worse, that's kind of what we were forced into because of one of the shareholders being based in the States. But so what did it mean for me? It's I was sort of, in some ways I'd kind of already moved on. And this was just sort of not tying up loose ends, but felt like a good way to kind of just box it up and kind of.
Okay. And so were you operational in Optimal Workshop at that stage?
At Optimal Workshop, I was always kind of pretty arm's length. So obviously a co-founder, shareholder, director for the first 5 years, 7 years, something like that. Very involved early on. Done my fair share of going around conferences and kind of talking about the tool and that kind of thing, which was always tremendously satisfying and something which I think is the difference between services businesses and product companies, of course. That services, you only scale to the number of people that you've got and the hours in the day. To go to Ottawa and Berlin and all over the world, all over the States, and people have heard of this tool that we'd built in Wellington, New Zealand. It was pretty cool. They'd never heard of our consultancy business because, of course, why would they? I was very much arm's length from the day-to-day at Optimal Workshop.
You've talked about some of the challenges that you had from the founding, the shareholding perspective on building a product company. But as someone who'd successfully scaled a services company, and then you look at the operations and the trajectory of the product company, what were some of the things that were like, oh, wow, I didn't know you had to do it that way, or, that this was a real surprise to me when you were considering the differences, because they're starkly different in terms of how you go about achieving success in those businesses?
Yeah, I think one thing we did, for better or for worse, was to never take external capital until we were 14 years in. And so I don't know if that was just a lack of awareness, some naivety there. Probably, the kind of the capital in New Zealand at that time probably wasn't quite as the ecosystem isn't what it is today. Wasn't what it is today. So we bootstrapped it, and all the way along, we've never done a business course in our lives. Like, we were just sort of feeling our way and going, oh, is this how you do it? I don't know. I mean, it needs some more money. We need to pay some salaries. I guess we'll put some more of these dividends in from this other, from the services business. So yeah, as I said, I think that if we'd kind of had, well, certainly if I'd looked at it in the cold light of day, knowing, and could project the first 5 years at least, I would have gone, no, let's not do it. That's not a thing that could make money. But yeah, they are very, very different. It's kind of an interesting sliding doors thing to think about. What if we had taken money, and could that be, there are some tremendous, research tool type companies that are, that have had some pretty outsized exits and impacts in our field. But yeah, they're very different business models, and I think the main thing is that you just completely de-risk it with a services business. I mean, you're doing it wrong if you're not, making profit, and kind of, the question is always, do you hire ahead of the revenue curve or behind, and kind of to what point do you push people before you hire, the next consultant? But that's very, very different from a SaaS business where you don't even know really at the beginning if you're onto something, if this is something that's going to survive, that people want, that you're going to be able to build a business out of. So
yeah, I can name, I won't, but half a dozen companies pretty quickly that have been services companies that have endeavoured to spin out a product, and they've not succeeded at it. So what do you believe were some of the things that you guys did right?
We were very clear about creating a separate limited liability company, and for Sam to be employed by that company. So I think the big problem is that these services businesses half-ass their product endeavours. And the reason they half-ass it was because they've got clients waving money in their face, saying, please come and do this project, and to say, no, we don't want your money because we're kind of building this tool over here, which we may or may not, And so having it completely separate meant, I remember ACC, Sam was working, consulting to ACC at the time, and we were just like, I'm sorry, Sam doesn't work here anymore. He works for the product company. He doesn't work for the services business. So that was one thing I think we did, which was accidentally smart. And I think smart when it comes to our exit journey as well. So the type of company that buys a service business is very different from the type of company that buys a product business. So in that way, again, part of the reason the deal with PwC was so clean was because, Optimal Workshop had nothing to do with it. And it was owned by the same three shareholders, but otherwise they were completely different, I guess similar markets, but very different profile. 95% of the revenue, 98% of the revenue of the SaaS business was offshore versus 100% of the business being in New Zealand for the services company. So yeah, that's I guess one thing that we stumbled into was those separation of concerns. I think that was a pretty important thing to do. And then I guess, just treating them for the different business models that they are, appreciating that you might, it might be years before you turn a profit on a product company. Yeah. Most likely it will be, but having the patience for that, understanding what that, build, measure, learn, product market fit, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. Different metrics too, you care about lifetime value and CAC and blah, blah, blah when you're dealing with a SaaS business. Well, you care about utilization and billability and other types of targets and KPIs for a professional services firm. So they're just very different business models.
The problem that you were solving for was one that you deeply understood as well, I think. And I once heard someone say, Alex Hormozy, I think it was actually, that 3 Ps of founding a business. If you have one, great. If you can have all 3, wonderful. A deep connection with the problem, an abiding passion for the thing that you are doing, or it is my purpose to be here. And it sounds like you probably had 2 of the 3 of those things. Maybe, did Sam have the third one as well? He probably had the passion for it. But was it purpose? Like, why I'm here?
I think passion, this is another interesting thing too, and I think this is true for both Sam and I, is that we were really interested in business building. The curiosity and the kind of, it went on holiday. I was reading books on marketing. I wasn't reading books necessarily about usability, because the actual construction of a business, the building of a team, how do you sell? Like all of these things which we're learning for the first time, kept us really engaged and interested. And so there is a passion, not necessarily, there was a passion for the field, for trying to make things more intuitive and easy to use. That's, how many countless thousands, millions of hours of human life are wasted because you can't find your way around a hospital. because the wayfinding is poor or the signage is poor, or that was the kind of things that that we were interested in solving for, except on websites, trying to help people find their way. So, but yeah, we were interested in some of those other aspects of building a business, of the people side of things too, which I think, and for me personally, I spent nearly 10 years at Optimal. I felt like I had 4 careers. The first was learning the craft, the day-to-day consulting, the actual doing the work. Then I was learning how to sell, going into, the banks or big corporates or public sector or wherever it was. Then I had to learn to manage a team as we grew. So the people management and performance reviews and one-on-ones and, that kind of practice. And then towards the end there, all about the leadership, the vision, values, culture, all of that sort of stuff. So it felt like 4 careers in one, which is often the way I think in startup land. You do end up being a jack of all trades and learning a lot about a lot of different things, which is, if you're wired like I am, very energizing.
Apologies for the interruption, and thanks for listening to the show. These shows take resources to build and put together. We have a team of producers, we have some promoters behind the scenes, and of course we have the guests that generously give their time to come on the show. My only ask of you is that you go and check out my website. I advise founders on how to build value and how to navigate the exit process successfully. We have a diagnostic on the website. There's an ebook that I've written. There's a free chapter of my upcoming book, Wantrepreneur, on there. So I'd just urge you to take a couple of minutes and go and check out joshcomrie.com. I think you hope to. I see founders quite often who are at year 3, year 7, year 10 tend to be inflection points, and they've fallen out of love with their business. And it's actually not the business they're out of love with, it's the job that they have ended up doing themselves. And because at the outset, the old E-Myth thing, you're a salesperson, a technician, a manager, or an entrepreneur, but you're the entrepreneur for 5 minutes, and then you end up kind of defaulting back to the thing that you did. And then over time, you grow the business based around whatever skills you've got, and you hire all these people to do these things. At the outset, ideally, you want to hire people for the things that you're not that good at and that you don't like doing, that are really important to the company's success. But then over time, you end up kind of often getting marginalized into doing these functions like, writing reports or approving accounts or, doing training of the low-level staff, whatever the things are. And often I see these folk that are just so super frustrated with the existence that they've got, whereas it sounds as if your journey was quite different because you hit the trajectory enabled you to go through that growth, that conscious growth with the business in service of the business, but it meant that Trent got what he wanted along the way as well.
Yeah, and I think surely one of the benefits of having your own thing is job design.
Surely. It should be.
I remember once actually Ian, what's his last name? Animation Research. Taylor. Talked about getting the Formula One contract, and that's because they were wanting to go to Monaco. Yeah. That was let's go to Monaco. Wouldn't it be cool to be in Monaco? And so I've always and we ran the business in a very similar way. I want to move to Auckland because I'm bored. Sam wants to start a product company because he's bored. We go traveling overseas all the time. That gets us known amongst the luminaries of our field because we go to conferences so often that we can't be bothered with the speaking sessions. So we hang out in the hallways in between. And who else is hanging out in the hallways? It's the keynote speakers. It's the authors. They get to know us. That's who we're partying with at these conferences when they write their books. They're kind of writing our tools into their books. That's not because we had this grand plan of which actually on paper looks dumb because it's so, lots and lots of hours of going to conferences all over the world, but it's because we were passionate about it. And so similarly, I think, of course, there are times in a business you've got to do your thing and you've got to do whatever's required of you to do. But I think there is some freedom in being able to kind of craft your ideal.
That's a beautiful conference hack, and I haven't heard it described that way before. Don't go to the speaking sessions, hang around in the hallways, and you'll get to meet the other speakers and the authors and whoever else is around. Was that conscious, or was it just because the speakers just sounded a bit boring?
I don't know if it's conscious. I guess partly it's being deliberate about there's that cool person, I want to go and talk to them. Yeah. And actually, a story along a similar line. So we had one major competitor at the time, a few years ago now. We met that competitor at a conference in the hallway between the sessions and said, Jed, one day you might decide that you don't want to do this anymore. just let us know when that happens. Give us a call and we'll have a chat. And that happened. He called us up and said, "Oh, look, I don't know if you are, serious or not, but I'm thinking about selling my business." And so we invited him down to New Zealand and tried to woo him a little bit, and eventually bought his company. So for a pretty small sum, but that was kind of another hallway conversation that happened at a conference.
That was a competitor of Optimal Workshop?
That's right, Optimal Workshop, and we kind of, my intent was that we would kind of have, a bit like the Unilever strategy. You'd have the Pantene and then the Sunsilk or whatever, and you kind of have two brands, and people wouldn't realise it was owned by the same organisation. They had a different business model. They were kind of, different user interface, different set of customers. So the plan was a good plan, but I'm not sure that we actually ever really made the most of it.
Yeah, what happened?
Well, I think, to be honest, and this has happened several times in my career that I've seen, I don't know that our CEO at the time, Optimal Workshop, was that bought into it. I was enamoured by the idea of buying a US competitor and doing the strategy, and but I was on the board but not kind of doing the day-to-day integration. So possibly that was part of it, is that Andrew wasn't along for the ride. Or maybe we just bought a dud. I'm not sure, but haven't ever really fully unpacked that with him. But certainly seen that in other organisations where a acquisition has been foisted on someone, and they've just kind of, it's not gone that well.
It's tricky. What did Mike Kamar say? Any idiot can buy a business, but it takes someone with a process and a plan to be able to integrate that business successfully. And so it seems as if you had some clarity on how the product mix might work together, but not necessarily how the execution post that acquisition may go out. Is that kind of that's a very simplified version from where I'm sitting?
Yeah, and I mean, that's another interesting thought experiment to go, what would have happened? I mean, clearly he was just had enough. He was a one-man band, and so perhaps if we just hadn't spent the money that we spent, it probably would have just faded away, so in retrospect, maybe we didn't need to spend that money. And maybe it was more about my ego than anything else, to be able to kind of acquire our major competitor. It felt like a pretty cool thing to do.
It's funny, I talk about the idea of big swinging dick moments, forgive the nomenclature, but it's the ego moment. And so it's a great ego moment to sell a company. And if you think that's a great one, go out and buy a company, because that's an even bigger moment. And so it's the notion of, I own you now, and all your dreams and hopes and aspirations and desires and all the people that look up to you and worship you, they're mine now, kind of thing. And that's not conscious, and I'm not implying that about you, by the way, because the few times that we've met, I wouldn't describe you as an egotistical guy at all. But there is some element of ego making some decisions for us along the way. I've certainly, I went through an intentioned endeavour to have the death of the ego experience as I got to a certain age and stage, and I looked at the decisions that I'd made in my life, and the ones that had been great decisions and the ones that had been terrible decisions, and my bad decisions had been made by my ego, how I want to appear to the world and the person that I wanted to project, and they were not good.
So, surely there is something about ambition and ego being intertwined. And I would think that, I don't know, it's a hypothesis that a lot of the big important things in the world, a lot of the important things in your life would have been driven, especially in business, by ambition, drive. How is that not also relating to ego?
Yeah, it's exactly right. So I think it's a paradox to be able to separate those two things out. And I think maybe over time, what happened for me is that the ambition, the drive, ego, intrinsically linked together, got me to a certain stage. And then probably the ego aspect maybe took over slightly. And so the ambition and the drive was still there, but the desire to appear and to want to do certain things that would make me appear in a certain way was some of those things that I'd done, which was a bit, There's a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Great book.
Well, I think it's a great long form article. It's one of those
it's a great title.
Yeah, it's one of those mini books which, probably could have been a couple of chapters, and instead they have to write this book, so they've pad it, but you're right. The underlying concept, I think, is really helpful. And I remember one of them for me was always adding value in a meeting. The fact that you turn up to a meeting, you've always got to have the last word. You've always got to say your piece. And kind of the point in this book was to say, actually, you're undermining the team. You think you're just being, you've got some insight to share, and kind of, but actually, at the end of the day, do you really need to add that value?
Interesting.
Which was totally true for for me, that I would come into the meeting and be the last one with the last word and all that sort of stuff.
So the intention was probably right, but maybe the execution of it and how it came across for others in the room maybe was a little bit misplaced.
Yeah. Especially when you got the founder and the CEO in the room coming in and expressing his opinion. I remember once actually where should we all go? Because we'd run these kind of once a year Christmas we'd go away. All of us would eventually hired kind of the top 10 in Taupo and kind of had all the families and all the rest of it. And then one year I joked, we should go to Fiji or somewhere like that. And then Ruth, my good friend and 2IC at the time, pulled me aside and went, you're not just one of the guys, right? You're not just one. When you say shit like that, people pay attention in a way that they don't when it's somebody else and I know that you're not serious and you're just having a laugh, but you can't say that sort of stuff. And I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah. That's good on her for having that dialogue with you.
She's always been good.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah. I think as a CEO, it's really, really important to have a ear to the organisation, which tends to often need to be through a third party, someone else that's that level down, level across, whatever it might be, so it can give you the hearts of the people, more so than necessarily the minds.
Yeah, I've been lucky. So I worked with Ruth at Unisys at Optimal Usability, and then I followed her actually to Trade Me. So she reported to me at Trade Me when I was the Chief Product Officer and then the Chief Customer Officer. And there were times when she had to, I remember one memorable time when she had to host an intervention. So her and another colleague kind of thought that the decision I was making was poorly thought through. And so, she sort of approached me and said, look, we need to have a talk about this. And so she's always spoke the truth in love is the way I describe it. And actually at that time I was like, if you need me to pay attention, I can't have this conversation right now. We can make it, because I wasn't in the, I don't know, had a full plate, had a meeting and then in 5 minutes time or something. And I was like, if you want to have a serious conversation about this, that's cool, but we're going to do it next week.
Yeah, wow.
If you want me to listen. So, when you've got those really, especially someone like her who I'd worked with for a long time, we know each other's rhythms. We know, she was, challenging me on something important, but I could see that, I accepted that, but I could also tell her now is not the time to be challenging me on this. Anyway, so it ended up happening next week.
Good on you. I want to talk about Trade Me, but I just want to wrap up with Workshop there because that business you've also taken through an exit process. Yep. So tell us what you can about that.
So quite a few years in, I guess, I was again, arm's length, I wasn't even on the board, but we would meet once a year for the AGM, and I started to agitate a little bit on, okay, what's the plan here? Are we going to exit this business? Should we be expecting a dividend stream? We've been at it for quite a few years, over a decade at that point. There's been no return really for the risk that we'd had in the business, cut from maybe 2 small dividend payments over that entire time. And so we ended up engaging an organisation to kind of help us figure that out, and then what eventually transpired was a sale of 60% of the business to Pioneer Capital, so a private equity firm. So we'd kind of got to the point where we're probably a little bit too big for VC in the sense of the total market size. So not in the sense of I don't want to say that we're too big for VC, but for the potential growth for the business. And so as you know, the private equity play is a little bit different. They take a bigger chunk of the business and then have different expectations about return and the timeframes for those returns. Ended up with Pioneer buying 60% in December 2021. So 14-year overnight success story. So another kind of takes a long time. Businesses don't get sold, they get bought, all that sort of stuff. So, although we did kind of we're quite proactive towards the end there.
Yeah. You mentioned to me that timing, you probably feel like you got it right twice, but it taught you the wrong lessons.
Yep.
In what way?
So probably more in general, I've had a number of successes, I guess, with both Optimals, and then was an early investor in Vend and in Publons. And so I had all of these exits that had gone really well. They'd done what they're supposed to do. They're, not 100x, but they were, the investments in Publons and Vend, they were 7 or 8 times money. Publons was very quick. I think that was after 3 years.
Yeah, I remember hearing about it.
Vend was more like 7 or 8 years. And so the lesson I learned, which I kind of knew, but still, was, this is easy. You just kind of, you expect a few to go down in terms of early stage investing, but, so far I've got 100%, that have done well.
Right.
So yeah, since then I've had 3, I think, go out of business. So I'm kind of learning the lessons the hard way, and I'm sort of making the wrong mistakes in terms of check sizes. But no, I mean, that was quite deliberate. So after the exit from Pioneer, so 2021, I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a bunch of money and I'm gonna pretend to be a VC, and I'm actually not going to write the small checks, because I'm like, it's not as interesting. If you put $5,000 into a business and that turns into 50,000, that's great outcome, but to 10x $5,000 is not as interesting as it is.
It's not going to change your life.
Yeah. So yeah, I was writing some big checks to places that I should not have been writing big checks to, as it's turned out. So that's the main thing. But I was, having said that, like, I was very open to the idea of those things going out of business. I was very experimental with where I was investing, what I was investing in, and even the vehicle. Do I do it via crowdfunding? Do I do it via an angel list in the States? Do I go direct? Do I do it via a fund? All those kind of different options out there. I was quite keen to learn the pros and cons firsthand of some of those things. So I've made a bunch of mistakes along the way.
Yeah, likewise. I also had my first investment in someone else's vehicle go exceptionally well. 7 years, 22x.
Nice.
10 grand was the number, so 220 grand came back. But then I started my first company, and in the background I'd invested in another half a dozen or so companies. Mm-hmm. And so I decided that I should probably learn some things about this. And I met with a gentleman called Bill Payne, rest in peace, Bill. He was a Uber angel, came out from the States, brought out by the Arse House back about, this would have been 15, 18 years or so ago. And he talked about the rule of 10, which is for every 10 investments that you make, 3 you'll lose your money, 3 you'll kind of break even, 3 you'll get a 1x, so you'll be back to around about equals on that 9, and then 1 will go between 15 and 20x, and that's how the portfolio works. And so I heard this story and I said to Bill, well, my first investment went 22x and I've made these other 6 investments. What should I do? And he goes, get out now. I didn't listen. I kept on going. I've had some very, very fortuitous success in the meantime since then, and a lot of the things have failed. Interesting conversation that I was having with a group in Wellington yesterday. And it was focused on the exit. And we started talking immediately about Soupy. And Soupy had the wrong form of exit, which was a liquidation exit. Yep. It is a form of exit. And so we started talking about risk and return immediately. And, the consciousness is, as a investor, that you don't do it in the angel space purely for the money. There's a hope of some return down the path. But it was the idea, and I brought this into the conversation around, do we leave companies running for too long in New Zealand? Because that was the subtext, the subtone of what was going around in the conversation. Because in my portfolio, 55 investments that I've made, I've had half a dozen, 7 exits, I think, out of it. And there's been 4, maybe 5 that have been liquidated along the way. And there's a bunch of them that are just lurking around. And
zombie companies.
They're absolutely zombies, right? And you know what you should do with zombies? You take them out and shoot them in the head, right? And let the founder move on with their life and get on to the next thing. Do you have a view on that?
I agree. I mean, it sounds quite callous to talk about it here,
It does.
In that way, because that could well be their life's work. But no, I do think there is something to be said about, okay, this is never going to get to, what we all agreed was, what we'd hoped for. I think the Soupy story is an interesting one too, and so I invested in Soupy as well, and that was partly, for the hope of a return. You're not doing it, for nothing, but also because I thought it was the right thing to do, because, we have a duopoly in the supermarket industry in this country, and if we had someone break that duopoly, it's bound to be good for New Zealand. So that's another lens that I put over some of these investments too, which I'm sure you do as well. So clean tech and, there's a lot of organisations which, in growing a company and growing wealth, is going to end up better for the country and hopefully for the world. But I agree. These zombie companies aren't good for anyone, I don't think, at the end of the day. The trick is, though, is to what extent could there be, are they one pivot away from, and there's lots of stories about companies which are so close to death, and then, Slack, or, what was the other one that he did? It was Flickr.
Yes.
What's his name? Anyway, he had two big pivots of companies that were like, But then maybe the interesting thing, and the point that wasn't a decade.
Yes.
That was only a few years of him trying something. Is his name Stephen?
Can't recall.
I don't
know of the Slack story, but
notes.
not the Flickr one. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same guy.
Yes.
Who
Interesting.
was building this game or this something, and then that wasn't working, and then they had this photo sharing component of it, and then all of a sudden they're kind of that, oh, maybe we should just do that instead and just focus on this one feature, and then that created this wonderful business at the time. I don't know if it's still around, Flickr, but and same with Slack. Slack was never the idea. Slack was kind of a tool that they used internally while they were doing their thing. So but like I say, I think your point remains. If it's a company that's been in 10 or 15 years, trying to figure out what to do, maybe that's enough.
Yeah, Simpson's just published his book, How to Be Wrong, Timely, Vend, Trade Me, and there's another one which was in there, and they all had this moment where they're about to go out of business for a number of reasons. Bring up Trade Me again brings to the point of the conversation I want to talk to you about. You took a job. What was that like, and why did you do it?
Can I just give you a little on the side? So whenever I get a book signed, I try and get the author to say, "Dear Trent, you taught me everything I know. Love," the author's name. And so I got an early copy of Rowan's book, and he was saying, "What do you want as part of the sign?" I said, "Well, I want you to say, 'Dear Trent, thank you for teaching me everything I know. Love, Rowan.'"
Did he?
He did it. He's the first and only.
What a legend.
What a legend. So, look, the way that I ran optimal usability was very, I thought, collegial and kind of, a great team of people working towards a common goal. And so working at Vend and then later on at Trade Me, it felt the same. Like it felt like, okay, so I wasn't the boss man, but I was kind of part of a group of people working towards a common goal. And that was inspiring and interesting to me. And I didn't find it that different. I mean, it was interesting because the number of comments I got, the number of questions, what's it like working for the man? And I'm like, well, it's pretty cool. It's pretty good. I don't know. And maybe that's because I'm not a natural born entrepreneur. I kind of fell into it through a dissatisfaction with the status quo, kind of follow my friend Sam. I was never a lemonade kid, growing up. And so, I really didn't find it too, obviously different cultures, organisation cultures, different size organisations, there's some interesting things there. And actually, if anything, at Trade Me, I hated that people treated me differently because I was on the exec. I really felt it. That, not quite the conversations got quieter when I was around, all that kind of thing. But and in fact, the people that I've remained mates with at Trade Me, or the people that I had, the best times with, were often the people who, would forget about any sense of where I sat in the hierarchy because we were talking shit at Friday night drinks, and it was just normal, just hanging out with colleagues rather than thinking that I was. It just gives me the heebie-jeebies that someone thinks that I'm above them or.
Yeah, interesting question to ponder though. So you had Jen at Optimal and she called you out afterwards for the Fiji thing. And so do you think that people treated you different at Optimal but you just didn't know that they did? Whereas at Trade Me it was more pronounced and obvious?
That Ruth was her name.
Sorry, Ruth.
I think it would have, I think I would have known if they treated me differently at Optimal. And yeah, they did, of course. I think when you're the leader of an organisation, people look at you in a different way. They're looking for cues. They, if I'm having a bad day or, and I do tend to be a little bit emotionally leaky, you're going to know how I feel by the look on my face. I'm not going to mask that very well. But no, I think that things were, on the whole, pretty good like that. I never felt like people were hiding their... It's not that people were being inauthentic with me. It just that it felt like I was being treated differently, and it might just be a scale thing, right? So 650 odd people that trained me when I was there. I don't know, but it didn't make me feel very comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Today, you identify as being retired.
Semi-retired,
yeah, okay, and so that was a accidental thing rather than an intentional thing. So what kind of insight have you got for folk that are along the founding journey, maybe considering an exit, maybe they've been in an exit? What I've seen quite regularly for folk is that they dive into the next thing without being conscious about what it is that they're doing. So is this a very intentioned part of the Trent life plan, or is it an accidental?
It was an accidental start, but then sort of quite deliberate. So after Trade Me, I decided that I wanted to do a give back, and so for that I went and became the CEO at Summer of Tech for a couple of years. So that is a program that places tech students into paid summertime internships, and I'd used Summer of Tech students a bunch at various roles across all three of those companies, Trade Me and both Optimals. And thought, what they did was awesome. And so I thought, this would be a good opportunity after working for a super commercial, publicly listed company to kind of go into something that was not for profit and kind of very, very much small scale, volunteer run. And so I did that for a couple of years, including over COVID, which was challenging when you're an organisation that relies on events. We hosted, some pretty, a couple of thousand people would come to our career fairs and things like that over the course of the year. We do lots of these kind of skills building sessions. So that was a challenging year over COVID. But also got to the point where, I've kind of done my give back. I've given back. We've grown, feel pretty happy, but personally I wasn't learning anything new. So decided to finish up there. And around the same time, I broke up with my wife and decided that, given that I had 50-50 custody of the kids, it made no sense to go to one of these big corporate jobs again, which required, the usual pound of flesh. And throughout the early years, my kids were, primarily looked after by my ex-wife. So she would do the play dates and the drop-offs and the pickups and the extracurriculars. And I decided, if I'm having them 50-50, I'm not going to get a nanny. I'm not going to do after-school care and that kind of thing. I'm going to kind of dial up the kids and dial down the career was the way that I thought about it. And so, decided to do a bit of ad hoc consulting and advising and the odd, governance role, that kind of thing. And also, run the road patrol, do cross-country marshal, touch rugby coach. I was useless at most of these things, but and just sort of get more involved in my kids' lives. And so that's what's happened over the last 3-ish years. And now they're 12 and 14 and kind of are ready for, I think we're probably all ready for the next season, which is, I'll be looking to, that's why I say semi-retired, probably looking to go back into something again shortly. Yeah. Now that they need me for fewer hours in the day as they kind of grow.
Not sure if I recommended this book to you, but I'll talk about it now anyway. From Strength to Strength by Charles M. Brooks. Is that a book you've come across?
Yep.
Yeah, and the notion is that for those that haven't come across the book is that we have two different forms of intelligence, which is, he calls them fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the ability to think quickly, solve problems, be very, very creative, drawing on a range of different sources. Crystallized intelligence is essentially wisdom. So it's learned, lived experience, and then being able to draw from all of these things and then apply them to different contexts. And so certainly something that I've observed of others, and I haven't talked about it really on this forum, is that I went from my first exit immediately into another venture. Not immediately, I had 6 months to kind of ponder my navel, do some travel, get some things out of my system. Massive identity crisis. I'm going to talk to you about this about a second as well. Massive identity crisis, and then went into the next thing, and it was intense. And it was a AI platform startup, but back in 2017, before AI was a thing, it was totally a thing, and it was the next wave of AI. We just happened to come out of the AI winter over a period of time. And my personal journey was that I desired to go and start a product company, as I hadn't done that. I'd done services companies before that, and my ego was telling me that you need to go and do this and prove yourself and go and raise a few $1 million and kind of, getting around that space. And I was living the dream in air quotes. And I found myself at year 3, having taken the business from naught to a couple of $1 million of recurring revenue, bit of a rocket ship, then moved to Australia with Tina, my now wife. And I was right in the middle. I call myself the meat in the shit sandwich. I was in between the board, the investors, the customers, the partners, the staff, and co-founders. And I was stuck in the middle there. And I was fucking hating life, absolutely hating it. And I had one of those days where I was come from a couple of performance management meetings in the morning. I'd had a investor please explain call, had a board meeting. The company had missed its number that was the second quarter in terms of our growth number, because we'd gone massive growth, and then we'd kind of leveled out our growth number. And so I was really having a miserable time. And I distinctly remember this moment, work from home day, and I was sitting in the home office living in Sydney, and Tina came in, and I'd asked her to step up from being a wonderful girlfriend and to bring some of the partnership elements, the different aspects that brings. Essentially being able to see my blind spots was what I was asking of her. And I was giving her some of this in the home office, and she comes in and she puts her hand on my shoulder. And I look up at her and she says, "Do you need to be doing this, my love?" Such a powerful question. And I won't call out that it was a closed question in this particular moment, because it was so powerful for her to ask that for me, because she could see that I was having a miserable time living the dream, being the startup CEO. And so it was that moment that I decided to begin my succession plan inside the business. And so very powerful, very formative for me. But I'd created something for myself that I thought that I wanted. My ego wanted it, but in reality, I didn't want it. And what I'd also probably not factored in is that I was probably mid-40s at that stage. And so the intensity and the level of work output that is required to successfully grow a startup, it's intense. And so you may not have thought too much about it, but how are you going to factor in the life plans and the life experience that you've had to date? You've got services, you've got product, you've done some for good related things. How are all those things going to play into your decision making about what next may look like?
I don't know.
I should keep my questions shorter.
Yeah, I think these are excellent things to ponder. I think it has to be, having done for good and having done for profit and having done build your own, like one thing is true, and that it's got to ring a bell. It's got to be something that you're really passionate about. And for me now, those are kind of, New Zealand in scale, global in scale. I've been doing a bit of philanthropy in recent years, fumbling my way through it like I do with everything. But one of the things that someone asked me about, because I was looking at doing all sorts of different things, and she said, imagine if you could wave a magic wand. What's the one thing that you would change about your neighbourhood? What's the one thing you would change about your city? What's the one thing you change about New Zealand? What's the one thing you change about the world? And I think about those things. I thought about them deeply then. I think about them often now, and they kind of, when you're putting your life force into the next thing, then they've got to align with the answers to those questions. And so, for example, for me around my local community, it's about community and belonging and, that kind of connection, that kind of thing, which has got nothing to do with philanthropy. And my conclusion was actually that's something that's about opening my home and kind of sharing some of these other assets that I've got, getting involved in the tennis club bake sale or the sausage sizzle or the whatever, it's that kind of thing, right through to the world thing though. That I'd like to what's the one thing about the world that you'd change? For me, that's about the climate kind of crisis that and to me that's not philanthropy either. That's actually something which I think is going to be solved with technology change alongside policy change. But and that's why I think some of my investment dollars have got to be in these big bets for changing the environment. So anyway, those kind of, that way of thinking, I think I wouldn't have necessarily used those same kind of criteria early on when deciding on what a job or a pathway might be. But for me now, those are pretty important things to be considering.
Yeah. We have the luxurious position of being able to consider and ponder the decisions that we make. And so Mike Carden had a great expression that we post-rationalise things, and we love to do that, which is that we look back upon the decisions that we made, and these are the reasons that we did. And in reality,
perfect sense.
Yeah, of course. In reality, most of the decisions that we make are kind of very emotive in their basis. And so having the perspective that you do now is a wonderful thing. And not meaning to put too fine a point on it, but I'm curious, do you imagine it is as a founder again, as an operator of someone else's business, or as an investor advisor is what you're doing right now, doubling, tripling down on that?
Look, mainly, maybe, any one of those things could come to pass. I think your point about the energy that's required to build something from scratch, the way I think of it is almost like a flywheel, right? Where you've got to put your shoulder into it, and there is a push. There is you have to brute force those first bits. Although I met with someone earlier today who was talking about vibe coding, who reckons he's done 5 weeks of coding in 3 days by talking as well. He's not typing, he's dictating everything into the so I'm like, well, maybe there's a chance to kind of brute force your way in and a bit quicker. So I imagine there's the potential solopreneur route, which is kind of I've got some things that maybe I could play with there, or I think probably my sweet spot is CEO of a 60-person SaaS business that's already done a bit of fundraising. You're not the one who's changing the photocopier paper, and kind of the challenges are more about culture and growth and scaling. I think that's a pretty good sweet spot for me. But then again, there's other things which I think, from a governance perspective, I think a lot of boards don't have the product background that I've got or tech background that I've got. Like you, I'm sure I'm playing with AI every day, and so a lot of boards are probably not that connected with some of the more cutting edge stuff there. So I'm not sure what the next thing looks like exactly. I sort of know perhaps some of the things it doesn't look like, but there is, I've read the book that you mentioned, and I do think that there is something about the energy of youth when it comes to building companies, albeit there's many counterexamples of people who are, and in fact, the average age of entrepreneurs is a lot higher than you might think. It's just that our Mark Zuckerbergs and Bill Gates and their stories are the ones which capture our imagination. So they're the stories that are told, but I don't think that's really, when you look at it, zoom out, you'll see that the average age of an entrepreneur is at a lot older than you might
42.
think. Yeah.
So the average age of a successful entrepreneur out of Silicon Valley, oddly enough as well. Founding team of 3, one of them should be a female, 42 years old is the average. And then you go put those 3 things together and a whole bunch of other things, and then some luck and some timing and some money.
And then, sweet formula.
Yeah, sweet formula, just like that. There's a success formula. That's all you need to do.
Oh, I'm 47 though, so damn it. I have to find a 42-year-old and a female.
A 36-year-old, average them out, then you get 42. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Yep,
yeah.
Easy.
So you've been semi-retired for a couple of years now. And so do you have any advice for folk that are kind of pondering what the next step could look like for them, either in that situation or post their exit?
So a couple of, when was it? Maybe it was nearly a year ago. Sam, who I co-founded these businesses with, got in touch and said, the exact same thing. Have you got any advice for me? Because he was going to step away from his job and kind of move more into the, I guess, life that I've been leading for the last few years. And I think he thought I was going to write, a handful of bullet points and send him an email. And what happened was a 70,000 word.
That's a book.
Google document, a pamphlet. And so, I went a bit nuts and ended up kind of creating this, deciding I was going to put it on Substack. So I've kind of created this Dear Sam series of, I don't know what to call them, I guess weekly newsletters. So I think I've got a lot to say about that, but maybe go and check out the Substack. One thing I would say is that, especially there's not a lot of information out there for early retirees. There's plenty out there for the normal kind of phase of retirement, and they talk a lot of good things about kind of staying connected and all sorts of different things, taking up hobbies. And there's a bunch of information about how to get rich quick, I guess, how to get to the point where you can retire early. But there wasn't sort of anything specifically when I was, because I was like, surely there's a book that I could point Sam to, but there are no books. So I ended up writing this big spiel. One thing I would say is that early retirees, there's a few kind of horsemen of early retirement apocalypse. Please, world's smallest violin here, right? This is very much. Yeah. But there is definitely a loss of identity as you kind of step away from the normal work life, particularly when you don't have, friends who are in a similar boat. There's a lack of community because you're not on the bus, or you're not talking to the barista, you're not interacting with workmates in quite the same way. There's a lack of routine and structure, that just comes with the ebb and flow of not just daily work life, but quarterly reviews and yearly planning and all that sort of stuff. And then I think there is a genuine lack of purpose, which is something that I've probably felt most acutely that happens when you are stepping away from normal work. There's lots to enjoy about early retirement. The hobbies and improving your health span and all sorts, giving back, which is great. But lots and lots of advice on the old Substack if you're interested in finding out a bit about what I said to Sam at least.
Would people just search Trent Mankelow for that?
I think they'd probably search Dear Sam on Substack, actually.
Okay.
So the one I wrote this morning, for example, was about pursuing hospitality. So given that you've perhaps got a little bit more bandwidth than most, in the Bible they talk about practicing hospitality, but if you actually look at the Greek, the word practice is better translated as pursue, which I really enjoy as a kind of an idea to go, okay, we're not just going to be hospitable, we're actually going to go after it. And so, I sort of talked today in today's newsletter about, what that means for me, the 4 big events that I host every year, how to get the kids involved in that kind of thing, the value of a good potluck, that sort of thing. So, yeah, there's a bit to it. But.
Yeah, I can relate to all of the things that you mentioned along the way about what happens if you do choose to take that early or semi-retirement. I'd done that twice, and both times found myself the first time in a venture that I didn't know exactly what the negative consequences of it were going to be, and I didn't enjoy those negative consequences. And the second time I kind of took the time out and enjoyed it, but then realised that I needed to get back into doing something meaningful again. And I spent some time pondering, beautiful position, wonderful luxury, pondering my actual purpose. And I do talk about it openly and freely, to grow great people so that together we may make a difference in the world. And it's okay to profit from doing that as well. Tony Robbins is a wonderful leading light example of that for me. Have you pondered purpose and kind of reflected on what it may mean for you now? The whole Mark Twain, the 2 greatest days of a man's life, the day he was born and the day he figures out why.
I've really struggled with that. So I've kind of had a go at a few of those kind of things over the years, and then realised it doesn't quite ring true. Similar vein, growing great entrepreneurs and that kind of thing. I find that, to be something that I find rewarding, and I think offers value back to our country. But I'm not sure that that's quite right. So I'm still working on that one. It's interesting because I'm very goal driven. I'm very, a lot of the pieces of, long range planning, all that sort of stuff. I do all that, but I'm sort of still missing something. We have got a family kind of a vision, or at least maybe the vision's the wrong word, kind of a set of principles, which is quite helpful with the kids, kind of talking about how we act with one another and with other people. That's a little bit different to what you're talking about though, of course.
Yeah, I love that. Tina, my wife and I, we have a marriage charter.
Yeah, cool.
And it's our shared values and the way that we will show up for things and the behaviours that we don't want to see represented at any time. So we're very clear about that.
GPT write it?
No, pre-GPT.
Okay,
so this is back from just before we got married. So it's actually today. This is funny. We're going out for dinner after this, and it's our 4th wedding anniversary today. I forgot when I booked us into dinner. So it's okay.
I am attending your wedding anniversary. Is that what you're telling me?
We're going out to dinner. Yes, that's correct.
Oh, wow.
So you're an honoured guest. You're an honoured guest. Yeah.
Okay.
It's okay.
Are we going to review the charter? What's the normal?
That is the plan. Yeah. Okay. You're going to be our adjudicator if you need to step in. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Do I bring flowers or do you bring flowers?
Tina's going to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Terrific.
So we're both going to get flowers. You've got a pink jumper on, so it should be quite fitting. Yeah. So the other thing that I was going to mention about the things that you miss when you do the semi-retirement, and I don't think you mentioned it explicitly, when you have experienced some success, let's call it financial success or whatever form of success is that can have some allure, and it can be quite addictive. And so there's a reward hit, dopamine is the classic term, but there's also, you get some long-term success that can give you some, more enduring kind of satisfaction and some contentment. And if you don't have that type of success that you can attach yourself to, then that leaves also quite a big hole in your life as well. So that's something that I've found myself having to go out and try and create meaningful things, rather than invent something meaningless, because winning a game of darts is not that satisfying. I'm terrible at darts. I'd never win darts.
I often think about Michael Phelps in that scenario. Like, what was he, 23, and he won 8 gold medals.
The winningest gold medal of all time.
And you're 20, like, what do you do then?
I think he went off the rails, didn't he? He went
probably.
Nuts. Yeah. So we've had a wide-ranging conversation. We've talked about philanthropy. We've talked about foundership. We've talked about finding meaning and purpose. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that would be quite helpful for the audience, which is founders, owners, and entrepreneurs?
Look, I think the role of AI, you're probably talking about this with all of your guests. I feel like just this tremendous sense like we're at the beginning of, it's like the 1994 with the internet, it's really at the very beginning. And one thing I've heard said, which I think is very much true, is that whatever AI you've got today that you're playing around with is the worst AI you're ever going to use. Like from here, it's just going to get bigger and better. And I'm, I guess, a techno-optimist. I'm sort of thinking that this thing is only going to end up, on the whole, good for humankind. But to me, that's really, really exciting. And, if you are in the entrepreneurial space, in fact, if you are just any kind of worker, just about, you should be experimenting and having fun with this stuff. It's really exhilarating. It doesn't have to be like this, doom and gloom kind of scenario. So yeah, I mean that would be one reflection that I've got. It's just how exciting it is at the moment.
Yeah. 7 years ago, I did a speaking tour thing with the NZME PwC Talks thing, and it was on AI. And one of the key things that I was most excited about was positive health outcomes.
Yeah.
And I've got a personal story. I've been experiencing quite chronic and appreciating, as in getting worse, insomnia and tinnitus. And I've been 7 specialists. Western is just give you sleeping pills, right? So you get hooked on sleeping pills. So I've been through all the alternate routes and, variety of different forms of testing, which we've gone really, really deep on certain forms. I've spent $12,000 on different forms of tests. Oof. And then you kind of get all these results that you have to wade your way through. And so what I've decided to do is my practitioner is a combination of a human who can sense check some things and get a front facing to it, but it's GPT. And so it can consume all of the different testing results. I can give it complete context of my situation at the moment. I can talk through other forms of history. It doesn't forget anything.
No.
And you know how many biases ChatGPT's got? 0. It's got no biases.
Wow,
as far as I know.
that.
This is funny. Yeah, that's right. Someone joked the other day that unless maybe Merck in the background is feeding a whole bunch of information into the LLM to try and skew it towards something specific. But, there's now a treatment protocol that I'm just at the starting point of, and some interesting kind of freaky things that we're going to do. What I actually have, it turns out, is I have very high heavy metals in my system and plastics as well. So I've got a high toxicity in my system, and so the consequence for me is that mitochondrial health is very weak and ATP production is low. So the power cells, the energy cells in my cells, right down at the core, thermonuclear, wrong word, but that level is not operating properly because of these toxins that are in my system. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, when I did something similar recently, my son's been diagnosed with ADHD. You go to the MedSafe website, which have the information sheets on the different medications which are available, and then they're not written for anyone who hasn't got a medical degree, right? It's just they're so verbose. But to go to ChatGPT and go, just outline the pros and the cons, please, and give me a little bit of more detail of what does this mean for a 12-year-old boy, and what side effects can I expect, and what's the efficacy of this, and just to be able to ask, explain it to me like I was a 12-year-old boy, you can, But obviously with the big asterisks there around not believing everything that you get back.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's why I've got the human in the mix as well.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I was talking about this a few years ago, it turns out that the human body can experience 60,000 different possible conditions. And so for a human to try and have to need to remember all of the different symptoms.
Even a human doctor wouldn't be able to.
No possible realm of world that they can know even a tenth of those things well.
Yeah.
So, that's the reason for the machines, hopefully kind of that being one of the key outcomes. But let's pull back from that future imaginary world and talk about another imaginary world that there's an alternate Trent that lives in, and he's got a different career path, and he's deeply satisfied by that career. What would that have been?
I think a journalist. I think some of the things which are kind of interest me about human behaviour, and the curiosity I have, I should be on your side of the seat, I guess. Asking the questions. I just think that would have been super fun, particularly, I don't know, not necessarily investigative journalism, but stuff where you, you're doing journalism on things that matter, as opposed to perhaps things which, I can't imagine being a journalist for a local newspaper or community newspaper. Perhaps that would be less interesting. But which is slightly ironic given that I'm kind of got a career in tech, and you could argue that tech has kind of been part of the reason that journalism is on the wane, you might say. So
it's not overly reductive, but it's perhaps not entirely fair for you as an individual when you've chosen to pick up writing and communicating with people in a way about your experiences and lessons, and so that's a cool thing. So Trent, what a great conversation. I'm really pleased that you did decide to come and have the conversation, because after Chris came on late last year, I don't think I need to. And I said, well, we've got a different perspective here, and you've got a different story, and you do different things. And so turns out you both have quite a different but aligned view on many things. And so we've had a really rich, wide-ranging conversation. I'm so grateful that you chose to come and share your story.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Been awesome. If you enjoy these episodes, I hope you do. I love filming them, and the guests always say what a great and often cathartic experience it is for them. Then please do like and share. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm open to connect requests, and occasionally get emails from people as well asking me about my experience around certain subjects. So please do like and share, and continue to follow the show. I really appreciate your ears.